back to my channel. This is Rosica and I am the Midnight Reader. Today we are doing an October wrap-up. Fun. This is my day off. I have shit tons to do today, so we are gonna whack this shit out, okay? I liked the planty vibes of my last wrap-up, so I decided we were gonna park ourselves here again. One of my Hoyas is blooming and it's super exciting. I'm very sorry, you're gonna have to see plant shit. This is a Hoya linearis, most Hoya species flower. It's got these soft pine needle-like leaves, but it's got these beautiful like white flowers and I love them so much and I'm so happy they're blooming. It's so cool. All Hoya flowers are supposed to smell a little bit different. Some of them like popcorn or spices or things like that. To me, this one smells like jasmine a little bit. It's got like kind of a soapy vibe. So like jasmine soap. Like you bought this at Bed Bath & Beyond. So I read 4 books in October, which was pretty good coming out of a reading slump for me. My normal reading range would be like 4 to 7 books in a month. And it was a good month of reading for me. Like I enjoyed myself for the most part. I didn't slump and I've been having fun with the books that I've been reading. Also, hold on, the dog looks really cute. I have to show you. This is my filming buddy. He's just sitting here watching me. He's very sleepy. This is Dublin, my greyhound. He is turning 10 in like 2 days. He has no idea. Oh God, where was my tripod? Precarious. Anyway, so the first book that I read in October was called Sourdough, which is a novel by Robin Sloan. It has been on my TBR for a long time and I decided now was the time. I have read a Robin Sloan book before. I read, I think it's called Mr. Penumbra's 24-hour bookshop. Bookshop. The book follows Lois Clary. She's a software engineer in San Francisco who's working herself to the bone and she's just so burnt out and soul sucked. If anyone who watches this has ever seen the old like 90s movie Joe versus the Volcano with Tom Hanks, but in like the opening scene when he's like under the fluorescent lights in the office and it's like his soul is being sucked into the fluorescent lights by the horrible buzzing noise. Similar vibes. She has nothing that's like sort of making her enjoy life. This company also endorses a meal substitute called Slurry. It's just a packet of gray shit and it contains your nutrients and you drink that and it tastes terrible. And so like that's her life. However, one night she orders a sandwich from a hole-in-the-wall restaurant that's run by 2 brothers, like just a couple blocks from her apartment. And the sandwich changes her life. The soup changes her life. She experiences joie de vivre. Like she experiences like joy in life again because of this food. And so she starts ordering from them every single day and she sort of earns herself the moniker of being the best eater for this little restaurant. The 2 brothers get to know her pretty well. She loves them, except for one day, the 2 brothers decide that they are leaving. They're returning to Europe. They belong to some sort of mysterious culture which does not exist in real life. And they decide to leave her their sourdough starter. But this sourdough starter, it's a little mysterious. You have to play it strange music. It glows at night. It has a little bit of outer-worldly sci-fi vibes. Lois has never made bread before, so she kind of figures maybe this is just how sourdough goes. The story follows her escapades from roboticist to then amateur bread baker, then entering the world of high-stakes experimental farmers markets in Silicon Valley. I thought it was an interesting, funny premise that I would enjoy, and I enjoyed it for the first half of the book. But then the same thing happened to me in this book that happened in Mr. Penumbra's, which I think is maybe just a problem for me with this author, is that I just didn't care about the second half of the book at all. Like at halfway through, all the characters change and they kind of don't really come up again. And then you meet this whole new cast of characters that you don't really care that much about because they just showed up halfway through the book, and a bunch of like sort of stranger than fiction things start happening around the sourdough. But I just didn't really care. The last half was a real slog to get through. Felt the same way about Mr. Penumbra's. I remember really enjoying the first half and then I can't even remember what happened at the end of that book. And I can't really recall what happened at the end of this book because I didn't really care. The story just kind of fizzles out and it feels like the author's trying to push a metaphor without me really being clear on what the metaphor really is. So for me, this was a 3-star read. Next up, I read Wintering, The Power of Rest and Retreat in Difficult Times by Katherine May. It's a quiet little nonfiction book that I would sort of class as soft self-help. It's framed in the story of the seasons, and it's talking about how certain points in our life we experience what she terms wintering, a season of hibernation. This is usually sort of brought on by like drastic change in your life. It's, you know, a sudden severe illness, it's huge life changes, moving, losing a job, things like that. Times in your life when you just feel kind of like disconnected from everything that's growth and forward movement. And she frames it all in like a seasonal way because there's things we do to prepare for winter, actual winter in our own lives, like tiny rituals and cleaning and bringing light in and things like that. I did really enjoy it. It's a pretty short book. It's a very quiet story. It reminded me a little bit of The Sound of a Wild Snail Eating, except this woman didn't have a snail, so I felt bad for her. I wanted to give her a snail. My favorite parts of it sort of were the observations that humans mistake our lives as being completely linear when they're actually probably more cyclical. Like you're going to experience seasons in your life that have a lot of growth and a lot of happiness, and then you're going to experience seasons that are not that happy and you feel withdrawn from your people and your life. I did find a lot of like comfort in that because we get through actual winter in our lives because we know that spring is coming. And it's that sort of hope that kind of gets us through the very like deep depths of winter, as well as like trying to make the darker parts of our lives, both literal and metaphorical, a little brighter. It was a little slow in places, but I also think that the slowness of the book was pretty intentional because as someone who's recently experienced a solid couple months of winter, ironically in summer, from like health issues, I can tell you that sometimes you have to embrace the slog. And most days are not going to be great. I enjoyed it. Solid 3.5, 4-star read. Next, I did decide to participate in Victober this year. I just wanted something a little bit different, so I decided to pick a Victorian science fiction book. Published in 1895, I picked The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. I've always kind of wanted to read stuff by H.G. Wells as he is one of the original fathers of like science fiction. It tells the story of a Victorian time traveler who's an enthusiastic scientist who builds a time machine. And he uses that time machine to travel forward in time to the year 802,701. Funnily enough, I knew a little bit about the story, but the little bit that I knew was from being a huge fan of the show Wishbone in the 1990s. Where are my 90s babies at? Like, this is very 90s centric right now. If you've ever seen the show, it's a small Jack Russell Terrier, very cute dog, living with a family like in the Midwest or something. Like half of the show is like the family has a problem, and then the other half of the show is the Jack Russell Terrier hallucinating himself into a book of classic literature that's vaguely relevant and using like the themes of that story as they retell it to solve everyday problems. I did vaguely remember the Wishbone retelling of this. However, in my head, I thought that they went back in time, not forward in time. And the reason I think that happened is because when the time traveler goes forward in time, he encounters two like subspecies of humans, and those are the Morlocks and the Eloi. The Morlocks are now subterranean. They've retained more of their intellect, so they still use a lot of relatively high-tech machinery, but they've lost the ability to deal with light and the sun, so they're purely nocturnal creatures. The Eloi are still living above ground. They've sort of like wasted away in their own opulence, so they have pretty much no intellect left to speak up, very little language. He's definitely trying to make comparisons between, you know, the worker class versus the more affluent luxury class, and neither of them do particularly well in the future, but he's sort of extrapolating like what could happen if you let each go in their particular flaws. But I think I thought they went back in time because both species of human had significantly regressed. In other news, the time traveler as a character is like the worst anthropologist of all time. Like, he is not the dude who needs to travel through time. To summarize him as a character, he's like, yes, I observe them very carefully for 30 seconds and rapidly discern they have no nuance of culture or language. Like, I know this was written during the height of like British imperial colonialism, but Christ. He also makes the super problematic decision to just like take one of the female Eloi back into his own time without ever, recognizing that perhaps she would like a say in this at any point. Like, perhaps she might have an opinion of being like yanked backward in time 800,000 years. And he also seems to be fighting like some sort of inherent constant genocidal urge. So whenever he's around the Morlocks, he kind of does this thing where he's like, I was tempted to kill them all, but I shan't. You're just like, oh, you have issues. How's my British accent for all my UK people? Very sorry. I'll try to stop now. He also is just like a bad adventurer. More than once he just jumps into like dark places or goes underground to try to find his time machine, which has been stolen by the Morlocks, without taking any source of fire or without checking to see if his source of fire works multiple times. Like most of the action sequences in the book are because he like forgot to check if he had enough matches or to see whether or not he could light them on anything. But I will say, for as much as this main character in this book did enrage me at times, you can tell that it did engage me because I found it enraging. But it was different than I expected for like a sci-fi book. I did also really like that his vision of the future was a regression of society and humanity. It's well written. It made me angry. So it's like a 3.5 star read with another like problematic, begrudgingly given half a star. Next, I decided to celebrate one of my BookTube buddies who started around the same time as me, returning to BookTube after her own break. And that is Amy from Amy's Rambles, who's great. You should go to her channel and watch her videos because she's funny and has great book recommendations. So I decided to read something that she recommended that has been on my T-Bar list for a while, and that is A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking by T. Kingfisher. This is a YA fantasy, which is currently a standalone about a 14-year-old wizard named Mona. We put wizard in parentheses because she's not a wizard who's calling lightning or doing huge magic things. She's just a baker, and her magic is only with dough and baking. So the sort of magic she can do is stopping bread from burning and encouraging cakes to become light and fluffy. And very occasionally she makes gingerbread man dance. She works at her aunt's bakery and she's having a pretty good time in her life up until she goes to work in the morning and finds a dead girl on the floor of the bakery. She's rapidly swept up in murder, royal intrigue, and possibly having to defend the city using only dough. It's such a little whimsical delight. This is exactly the sort of book I would have really enjoyed reading when I was in the YA age range. I still loved it. I thought it was really, really cute and well written and funny. It was a story about baking. There is a sourdough starter in this named Bob, who is carnivorous and possibly Mona's familiar. And he has more personality than the sourdough starter in the book Sourdough. So if you're trying to pick a book that involves baked goods, I would pick this one. Great book, great recommendation from Amy. I gave this 5 stars, and it was a great way to end the month. So those were all the books that I read in October, and it was a pretty good time. I am deciding to do something a little bit crazy for November, which is that I'm going to participate in a readathon, which as a mood reader is worrisome. I'm going to be participating in the Bloomin Readathon set up by Allison Paiges, who's perhaps my favorite booktuber of all time, and who I am trying to become slowly through like osmosis. She's an American expat living in Belgium. She's just very funny and her videos are delightful and heartwarming. She does it full time, so her like video editing quality is amazing. But she's made this readathon. She did it last year. It's like a bingo board of I think 25 spaces. I think it's 5 by 5. Each space represents a little prompt. I'll link that video below. You try to read books that fulfill those prompts. You can do it kind of any way that you like. You can read one book for each of the individual prompts, which I will not be doing because currently I am averaging about 4 to 5 books a month. My current plan is that I want to make a bingo. I don't know how I'm going to do that yet. I have a list of books on my phone that I want to read. I'm going to try and pull books from that list and then use those books to fulfill as many prompts as possible on the board, and try to get as many bingos as possible. This is a very low-key readathon. There are no rules. I'm pretty sure she said multiple times, do what you want.
Just do what you want is the theme.
I'm gonna try to do a reading vlog for the month of November around that readathon. It seemed like something fun to try, so I'm gonna try it, and hopefully it does not put me in a reading slump. Fingers crossed. So this is my wrap up for October and my plan for November. What are your plans for the month of November? Are you doing any readathons? Are you participating in Nonfiction November? What you up to? Let me know. If you live in the Northern Hemisphere, the seasonal affective is officially here. So take care of yourselves, and I will see you all next week. Bye.